Okay, well, I guess the subject I wanted to talk to or talk with y'all today about with y'all is what the Bible has to say about capital punishment. I know Sean, no, my luck, he probably did class on that 2 weeks ago, but oh, he didn't believe in it. Oh, no. Anyway, he preached against it. Oh, okay, well, here's something to compare it with, I guess. I wanted to look at some Bible passages today about capital punishment, and I thought there's some relevance to it because I was listening on the radio the other day, and I forget the guy's name and the case and all that. A lot of the details they left me, but I remember hearing, and this is not just an isolated incident, it happens a lot. People who are on death row for the last 15 years, they'll be on there, and there's appeal after appeal after appeal for their sentence, wanting to at least reduce it to life in prison, if not more than that. A lesser sentence, reduce it more than that. And in our day and age, as far as, y'all see the news, you see, that's right before you take your antidepressants, watching the news, all right? The news media and Facebook too, and just thinking of other places where you have social medias, there is just a lot of liberal thought going around, and there's just a lot of people today who they express the attitude that's become so much of America in many ways, that is the dismissal of personal responsibility. I want to be able to do something. If I make a mistake, okay, you may call it that, but I shouldn't get any consequences for it. Or if I do, they should be, very light. But I should be allowed to do this and that and thus and such and not receive really much penalty for it. And a lot of people have really downplayed the death penalty. I remember when I was in my government class, that would be spring last year, my U.S. government class over at Tarrant County College, TCC. I go to the Southeast campus. I remember in the class there, the professor, he brought up the death penalty at one point, and he said he knew there was going to be good dialogue. And there's a lot of people who expressed their thoughts on it, and there are a lot of people who don't like the death penalty. They think it's purposeless. They think it's an act of vengeance. And they think it should be dismissed. And what I want to do today is to look what the Bible says. Because the Christian, obviously, we're going to have to encounter people like this. We have to vote for candidates who possibly are for or against us if it's an issue with some of them. Not all of them bring this up, But there are a lot more and more liberal leadership going on. And we want to see as Christians where we stand. Because, of course, the Church of Christ is not a political body. We should not enter into the political realm as the church. We go in there as individuals of a community and do our influence as Christians, persuading people. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 11. So the point is, what does the Bible say about capital punishment? That way we can provide a biblical influence to people around us at work or wherever. School, here, because it's not all brethren in the church are in the court on this. So, I want us to look at a few passages. If you would, please, let's look first at, I'll just start saying here by saying Genesis chapter 6. If you remember in Genesis chapter 6, when God destroyed the earth, remember what the Bible says in verse 5, where it says, Genesis 6:5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Remember, God brought the flood waters upon the earth and saving only 8 souls, 1 Peter 3 and verse 20. Noah, his 3 sons, and all of their wives. It's 4 and 4, so it's 8 total. 8 human beings saved. This is a form, of course, this was God directly acting upon the earth, but this is a form of God, if you would, bringing about capital punishment on the entire globe. On a global scale, God punished capitally, if you would, all of mankind. Now, what's interesting is once Noah and his family got off, once the floodwaters receded and they walked off the ark and God spoke to Noah in Genesis 9, I want you to look at something. Genesis 9 and verse 5, where God says there to Noah, "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man rather. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man." And here's verse 6. "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it." What do we see here? Being authorized by God to Noah and his family, a command. What is it? Capital punishment? He said, right, exactly. "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." The crime, or the penalty fits the crime. And so what we see here is, and believe it or not, this is actually a first divine institution or authorization for a government entity. Because who's supposed to do, if a man commits a crime, if a man sheds man's blood, who's supposed to shed the criminal's blood? Right, I mean, but specifically though, I guess what does a text say? By man, right. God's not going to come down and flood the earth. God's not going to come down and kill the man himself. He says man should shed that man's blood. So God has authorized mankind to shed the blood of men who shed other men's blood. That makes sense? So we see here in Genesis 9 a law that is given. And what era is this? What covenant, if you would? What age are we under? As a matter of fact, there's a little poster on the wall back there that would tell you. What's that? Patriarchal age. This was where God spoke to the heads of houses, the heads of the homes, their families. There wasn't a covenant with a certain group like the nation of Israel or, well, of course, the Lord's church. The new covenant is with the whole earth. The Lord's church, rather, is those who obey that covenant. Acts 17, verse 30 and 31. Oh, no. Did I even turn this on? Okay, good. I just remembered. I was like, ooh. Okay. So Genesis 9, verses 5 and 6, we see here the patriarchal age. God here has authorized man to shed man's blood when? When man sheds man's blood. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. Leviticus 17:11 is correct. But notice this too. In this very text, God gives the reason why it should be done. Why? For in the image of God he made man. Now we know that from the very beginning. Created order. Genesis 1:26 and 27. God created Adam and Eve in his image. And you tell people, here's the basis upon which this is given. God said you can kill another man, you can shed his blood if he sheds another man's blood, as long as the reason being here is because man is in the image of God. So if that reason is still in place today, then that is still in place. That's the reason why. Just like the woman's head covering in 1 Corinthians 11, the woman's submission to man is something that has been in place from the beginning. Right? It's been a law from the beginning. As long as the woman is in submission to man, there's a law, there was something that has been there from the very beginning. And from the beginning, God has said man is in the image of man. Or man is created in the image of God, rather. Genesis 1:26. And now what's interesting is, if you turn over real quick, turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We were there just a little bit ago, actually. 1 Corinthians 11, there's a very revealing text here to this point. It's one of those little verses that you read up, but then you hear someone else tied to something like, oh, wow, I didn't ever realize, but yeah, that makes the point. 1 Corinthians 11, and look at verse 7. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. You see that? Man is the image and glory of God. That's the reason why in Genesis 9, man should shed man's blood when man sheds man's blood, because he's in the image of God. That is still true today. And so therefore, my point is, if the reason is still in place, then the action is still authorized. It's still there. Make sense, anyone? Or is that confusing at all? That's Genesis 9. This is pre-Mosaic. This is pre-Christian age, of course. Pre-Mosaic. This is back this is back in the beginning era. This is when the earth was about 1,600 years old. Okay. Let's move on to some other verses right quick. I won't give a whole lot of attention in detail to the Old Testament, the law of Moses, because that there is very thorough. I mean, I believe a violation of, if I'm not mistaken, I believe a violation of every one of the 10 Commandments was punishable by death. We know in Exodus 21 that says here, parental abuse, kidnapping, cursing parents, killing a thief in revenge, failure to keep one animal from killing another, bestiality, adultery, a lot of sexual immoralities there, incest, homosexuality, breaking the Sabbath. Those were all punishable by death. God authorized people to kill people here. Now, don't get me wrong, because see, here's where some people say, oh, well, wait a minute. Doesn't the Bible say thou shalt not kill? And that's a reference specifically to what? The King James in Exodus 20 says thou shalt not kill. The idea here really, and if you're going to harmonize Scripture, is talking about malice or premeditated murder, where you intentionally, with poor motive, kill somebody. Because this is one thing I try to get across with people. It is not intrinsically wrong to kill a person. Killing is not an intrinsically wrong thing to do. It's the reason why you do it that makes it right or wrong. In Genesis 9, if a man sheds a man's blood, it would be okay to kill that person because of the reason why I'm killing them. Now, if I kill a person because I don't like the way they look, then I have a killing that's unauthorized because there's a bad reason behind it. The motive is not authorized. So the action is a neutral action, really. It depends on why you're doing it that would make it right or wrong. Does that make sense? That's something to establish, because a lot of people have this idea that killing is just always wrong. That's not true. Ask the... Right. You don't have that as a Christian today. Now, under the old law, under the patriarchal law, there wasn't really specified any governmental system. We'll get to that, what you're saying in just a second. You're right, though. You're exactly right. You don't have the right to go kill a man because you heard that he killed somebody, or you know that he killed somebody. Even if you witnessed, or I guess you could say, if you knew that he had killed somebody yourself, you can't go to his house, find him, and say, I saw what you did, What's that? Right. Yeah, you can't do that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But yeah, under the law of Moses, there were times where it was plentiful, he said, that God allowed or authorized the killing of people. What we're trying to do here is show that the God that we worship, the God we serve, is a God who allows the killing of certain individuals. Capital punishment is what we're talking about. He allows the killing of man under certain situations. So that shows us that killing is not an inherently good act. It's not inherently evil. It's a neutral act. And it depends on what you're doing it for, the reason why you're doing it. Just like, sexual behavior is not inherently, there's nothing, the act itself is not intrinsically wrong or right. It's basically, what's the condition, what's the arrangement that you're doing it in? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was something that was created by God, so in that way the act is holy, but it can be made right or wrong by the person you're doing it with. Understand? Same kind of thing, same idea. Just like using a knife. You can use it to cut steak or stab a man. Depends on how you use it. Okay, so Now, understand the fact that the law of Moses did allow killing. It allowed for the punishment of criminals. Now we come around to the New Testament, and we'll spend, I guess, the rest of our time there because, again, we're trying to establish the fact that capital punishment was allowed by God, and the Bible does not forbid certain individuals from having their lives taken by men. By men. Again, on the law of Moses, God didn't come down and just, kill every... I mean, he might have, of course, sometimes he did. But he wanted, under the law, he wanted the Israelites to carry out these sentences against themselves, against their own brethren when they violated these crimes. They were, because remember, the law of Moses was a civil law built into a religious law, if you would. Of course, New Testament Christianity, the New Covenant is not a civil law. We don't impose the New Testament in our government system. It's not a civil law like that. It's a law for the church. And the church can influence the civil community. It's influenced civil government, as we'll see in just a minute. And we'll talk back to what you said just a minute ago. We'll get to that. Right.
But yet, you look around and you can see the result of what happens when you don't.
That's exactly what I was kind of getting to in that lesson too. When I said about God asking us to do certain things because they're a test of faith, and some things people don't understand out there, not because we can't see the connection. We don't understand the reasoning to it. Some people just don't understand because they don't want to understand. They are willfully ignorant. 2 Thessalonians 2, they don't have a love for truth. And so they just dump off God like Richard Dawkins and these other fools out there who are just living in blatant rebellion to God. They just shove him off and they pursue their own human wisdom. And guess what? Their world is a mess. And they deceive themselves. Oh, I'm happy as an atheist. I'm happy over here. But you know what? I don't really believe that they're happy as they could be. Because the Bible teaches that true joy comes through being a faithful, obedient, same thing, Christian. That's how you get joy. God is not a liar. He's not going to tell us, here's how you get joy, and then here's people in the world having the same joy, pursuing their own things. It's not going to work like that. People have a misunderstanding of what joy really is, or they're deceiving themselves. People can deceive themselves. That's James 1:26, right there. A man who does not bridle his own tongue but deceives himself, his religion is useless. You can deceive yourself, and that's what people in the world do, because they probably don't want to admit, hey, I'm wrong about this, and I got to turn things around, or I got to, and especially when those guys get big in public with it, then it makes it that much harder to openly say, hey, y'all, look at me, because I was wrong, Oh yeah, it does seem like that a lot, and that's it's arrogant. I'll just say this, and not to pick one thing or the other, but I've perceived that in our current leadership in America. Our current government and our presidential administration always seems to there's so much obvious. With people in our leadership, there's a lot of people who have blatant errors and just seem to make the most sorry excuses and will never say, yeah, we messed up. It's like, give me a break. Get off your high horse, man. I'll have a lot more respect for you if you at least say, I made a mistake. I don't expect leaders to be perfect. I know you'll make a mistake. If you just admit it, I'll be like, okay, fine. Well, let's work on it and move on. But anyway. Okay. In the New Testament now, as we said a moment ago, the New Testament it's not like the Old Covenant where you have a list of civil laws, like about land and owning property and things like that. You don't have that here in the New Testament. You have principles that the Christian is to practice in their lives. and obedient actions that we're supposed to undertake. Jesus said in John 18:36, "My kingdom is not of this world." Remember that? Now, the Israelite nation, they had a local, land of Canaan, they had a localized, civilized nation, a kingdom right there. That was a physical nation. That was a kingdom of this world, if you would. Because it was of a physical people. The members were of a physical type, the descendants of Abraham. The nation that's today in the New Covenant, that's not a physical nation. It's composed of humans. We have physical bodies, but we're a spiritual kingdom. We are alike in a spiritual sense. How is that? Because we share a common faith. We share an obedient trust in God. It's on a non-physical level that we are the same, that we are one. That's why we're not a kingdom of this world. The Jews were a kingdom of this world because they did have a physical likeness. They were descendants of Abraham in a physical way. And they had borders on the earth here. So since Christ's kingdom is not like that, that's why you don't find civil laws concerning the church. But there are commands in the New Testament that are prescribed for governing authorities. Romans 13. Many of you may already be there. Romans 13, the first 7 verses show what God expects. Also, 1 Peter 2 has a brief couple of verses in there. I think it's 14 and 15. I won't go to that, though. But Romans 13, verses 1 through 7, I want to look at this. Look at Romans 13, 1 through 7. Paul there tells, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." You see this? Verse 2, "Therefore whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." Why? Verse 3, here's why. "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." You notice that? You think about that. You apply these Bible thoughts, these Bible teachings to our current. You just compare. Here's what the standard is. What do we see? Here's what the standard says. What do we see today? Notice that. Verse 3, "The rulers are supposed to be a terror, not to good works, but to evil works." Is that true? Does that happen? "Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good." That don't always work with us. See, this is why, because this is assuming that in the Bible here, this is under a proper authority. If you have a corrupt authority, it doesn't work like that. What's that?
It's like injustice.
Right, exactly. Corrupt authorities don't preserve good and eschew evil. They practice evil and punish the good. That's what corrupt authorities do. But anyways, verse 4. "For he is God's minister." That's talking about the governing authorities of verse 1. "He is God's minister to you for good." That's God's minister. In other words, he's God's servant. The government is here to serve God for a specific purpose. What? Verse 4. If you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil." There is where the Christian can say, I have an expectation of my government to do what God says he's supposed to do. It says he's a minister to God. He's God's servant to do what? As we said in the end of verse 4. To execute wrath on him who practices evil. Well, what's evil? Those things that would be contrary to the Bible, and also those things that are contrary to civil laws that are in accord with the Bible. Like breaking speed limits and, let me think of other things. Can't think of that's like paying debts. I'm saying of civil laws that are not outlined in the Bible, that are not necessarily pointed out specifically, but that fall under the authority of a government when they appoint certain things, right? I would say pay rent, but that's, Paul did say pay your debts. So, but that kind of stuff, you know what I'm saying? Civil laws that are appointed, even when those things are violated. You are to be, the Bible says that the government should punish those, execute wrath on them. Now, verse 5, you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Fear, in other words, show respect and honor for those in those government positions. Don't be disrespectful to their authority. Pay taxes to them. And also, you can expect them to and call them to account on it. Just like elders. It's anyone who's in a position of authority. Elders in the church. If we have elders here, let's say y'all had an eldership, you're supposed to, submit to them. Hebrews 13, right? 7 verse, also verse 17, I believe. But as a congregation, you can also hold them to the expectations they're supposed to have as elders. They can't just come up here, be elders, and all of a sudden just, we're not going to shepherd the church. No, you say, hey, you're supposed to shepherd the church now. We'll submit to you, but, we're holding you to your position. Because that's what God expects of you. Same thing with government. We can hold the government to what they're supposed to do. That's why the Christian can speak out and say the government needs to change its ways. John the Baptist rebuked Herod for all the evil things that he had done. Luke 3, I think verses 18 through 20. So there's nothing wrong with a righteous man appealing to the authorities and to encourage them, persuade them to change their ways and do what's right. That's okay. That's scriptural. But in this context, though, dealing with our subject, in verse 4, it does say, though, that the governing authorities are God's minister in that he does not bear the sword in vain, meaning in a meaningless or purposeless way. He executes wrath on those who practice evil. He does not bear the sword in vain. There, back to your point now, there is where the Christian can should be able to put their confidence in vengeance. Just a minute ago in the beginning of class when I said people say, oh, death penalty, that's just vengeance. Well, it is vengeance in a sense. It's God's vengeance through government. That's how God achieves vengeance. Go back to Romans 12. Look at Romans 12, verse 17. God says there through Paul, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Don't go around, carrying out vengeance on each other. If it's possible, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, verse 19, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. In other words, allow someone else to do it. It says in verse 19, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink, for in so doing you will heap coals of fire on his head. So, what he's saying here is, you live peaceably as much as you can. Give place to wrath. God says, I will avenge. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. How are you going to do that, God? He goes into it in verse 13. The governing authorities are my servant, God says. They serve me and they execute wrath. That's how I get my vengeance on people, is that I have a governing authority amongst you who will punish those who practice evil. Don't do it yourselves. You appeal to the governing authorities, you let them do it, because those are the ones that God says, I have appointed to punish those who practice evil. And you're right. Christians cannot go around and go executing personal vengeance against people. That's sinful.
Some few things have got abused with it. If they, like, let's say something happened and somebody killed one of the family members, and if I actually hold charges against them, that I'm the one that's trying to take vengeance on them, rather than allowing the law to do that, or that I'm not forgiving them.
You hold charges, you mean like
Well, like if I...
Like press legal charges?
Right. I think like if you... which the government, I know that the law would naturally do that anyway, but like people who say, well, I can't, for me to not forgive it, like they confuse the fact that by allowing it to be
Right.
Because he says we're to be kind to them, to give them water, whatever. But we can still forgive and have compassion toward the person who's done evil, even though they're being punished for
Right.
what they've done.
Right.
It's
Well, I mean, if
not two different things. It happens at the same time.
yeah, you can be forgiving and compassionate to someone while at the same time pursuing justice. I agree with that. I don't think justice, by definition, is means the lack of compassion, and amongst other things. Because, well, right, because where would justice ever come in then? If it's not merciful or not compassionate to carry out a punishment for something done, then you say, well, is there ever a place for justice then? Because if justice,
Confusion comes in also with God. You know, he's loving and compassionate and merciful.
sure,
So how can he punish you?
but yet he
So
will.
it's the same perversion that goes from
Right, and what it is, I think it's human understanding and human emotion, trying to assess a situation. We're letting our own feelings evaluate something. You know, it just doesn't seem very compassionate that he's going through with the lawyers on this. Well, I mean, it may not seem, but what is it? What is it actually? What does the Bible say? What does God say? How would this bear out in God's view of what justice is, what mercy is, and all that? If someone commits a crime against you, and you want to say, you know what, I can't do this. I can't, press charges against them. That's with you. I mean, if you want to not do it, that's up to you. I mean, no one says you must go to court against them. You must press charges. Make sure they get sentenced to punishment. Yeah, there's no one saying that. But if you want to, it's okay. If someone's committed a crime against you, you're allowed to do that because God says, "Here's my minister. Here's the one that I'll take, that I use to punish those who practice evil." If your conscience is against you in pressing charges on someone, then I would definitely, stop and consider that. Sure, I wouldn't go against my conscience and say, "Well, I don't think this is right, but I'm going to go ahead and press charges anyway." I wouldn't do that. No, never would I encourage someone to violate their conscience. But you are allowed. A Christian's allowed. If someone breaks into your home, for example, you can press charges on them. I would. Break into my house. I'll be waiting. Well, you know what I'm saying. I want to act like a tough guy. That's how you get killed. What's that?
God can't say can't loosely. He's not going to be able to have his vengeance on that person in the proper way and time. Like we press charges. With every punishment, it's in an effort to make the person better or to bring
Sure.
change. Something that's
Right, and I think that's something that needs to be considered is when the death penalty happens. That's one of the objections that's raised. People say, "Oh, well, death penalty, it's not a deterrent. It doesn't keep people from committing crimes." Well, my first question is, how do you know that? Well, how do you know that though? Well, it's like, well, yeah, but how do you know? How do you know that if someone, let's say, did you ever watch Time to Kill? With Matthew McConaughey. Remember that? Remember when he said in that lady, and when he was in that little restaurant, and they're all sitting there glistened over with sweat because they're in New Orleans, wherever? And he said, "I wouldn't mind going back to courthouse hangings on the courthouse lawn." And his point was, for the law to be blunt, and it would strike fear in the hearts of the people if they saw the law is to the point. And that's what we lack here. And what happens is, right, you're right. And what happens is, it's not that people are appealing to the death penalty. I think what people don't realize is they're trying to argue against the way we conduct or carry out our death penalty. That is a problem. I agree. Like it says in Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 11, "Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the hearts of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil." Because we wait years and years and years and years and years to put someone to death, people are like, "Oh, okay, well, big deal." But if you convicted someone and said, "Hey, here's the courtroom, the guy's guilty, here's the back door, we'll go out the back door and we'll take care of this now." Man, people are like, "Whoa."
really isn't. I'm like, there's some things that when you know for sure,
Yeah.
when they know for sure, there's evidence. I mean, in today's technology, yes, you
Right. Yeah. And people, oh yeah, and people like, oh, well, you may put someone innocent to death. You know, that's true. And that's why we take heed on how we convict somebody. But just because there may be someone, that doesn't mean we just totally remove the process altogether. You know, I think that's part of also living in a world that's corrupted with sin, is we have imperfect ways to deal with stuff. Because this is what happens when people do wrong. Other people, innocent people, suffer when people do wicked things. There are plenty of people who are in jail and shouldn't be. Should we just open all the jail doors and let everyone free? No. And it's funny because people they don't argue with that with incarceration. They argue with that the death penalty. Stop the death penalty because there's innocents who die. Okay, well, let all the incarcerations go because there's some people who are unjustly incarcerated. Oh, no. Like, oh, wait a minute. That's true. You're right. Look at Paul.
They are responsible before God. They killed someone wrongfully. That's their problem.
Exactly. That's why there should be, as they say, when you commit someone to death, it should be, you're supposed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the rule. And I think that's good. You know, if there's any reason where you're like, are we sure about that? You say, nope, then stop. Stop right there. Because I agree, you don't want to take someone's life if you aren't totally sure, because that's a serious move. But that's why it's like that Casey Anthony case. It's one of the reasons why she got out of it was because they were pressing for the death penalty instead of life in prison. And the death penalty, you got to bring out. You got to have a serious case of evidence for that. If you don't have your ducks in a row, you may have enough to convince for life in prison, but if you don't have that solid, beyond a reasonable doubt kind of proof, then you won't get your case. You won't win, because it's a hard thing to prove that. That's why you have something where like somebody shooting people in public, and you have all kinds of witnesses seeing this. That's where you can really push for something like the death penalty. But if you got like a guy shot another person in the woods, buried him, and ran off, and no one witnessed and all, it's hard, a lot harder when you do that. Eyewitness testimony is pretty strong when you have like the 500 people who saw Jesus witnessed raised from the dead at one time. 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, I think it was, yeah. Yes.
I was going to say that a lot of people
Oh, man.
now are, because of the DNA testing that God was able to us now, a lot of people are being treated for prisons because of
Right.
DNA. So, I wonder how many have been actually
Right.
put to death in Florida
Mm-hmm.
and had the DNA testing.
Probably a lot less, or maybe more. Maybe more. Maybe we would have had harder proof against people who got off free. It just goes to show, though, that when you have sin in the world, our systems get corrupted. We were talking about a minute ago about righteous people being put to death and all that. You know, we can't excuse it. We still got to have it. That's why we got to appoint judges, if there are any, that will judge righteously, judge according to the law. So you got corrupt judges. You got corruption in people. You could have a jury they're not faithful Christians. And so when they assess someone's, state of whether they're innocent or guilty, they may find some reason that's unjust. Say, I just don't think he's guilty. Or I think he's innocent, rather. I don't think he's innocent. I mean, all these things play a factor. When you have worldly people evaluating your crime, it's just, that right there already is you have a flawed system right there. You know what I mean? But the point is, though, that the Bible does not teach against capital punishment. It allows it. It allows it for certain crimes. Now, we got to determine for what crimes. We have in Genesis 9 a case there where punishment is allowed, death penalty is allowed for murder. So we know that right there is an explicit allowance. Now, other crimes that we deem worthy along that line, it's going to have to be up to the civil authorities to decide that. But we as Christians know that we can rightfully go for the death penalty. That's allowable, and I think it should be practiced in our country. I'm not saying we should go for a no mercy approach to people, but I do think we are overly merciful, if you would, our law system. We almost praise criminals, and you know, I guess I got to stop, huh? I'm just going on now. It's 11:22. But, yeah. In other words, but is there any questions about what we've been talking about? Is anyone not convinced or anyone kind of unclear? So basically, the point being, though, as Christians, though, as we deal with these things, we know that we can rightfully say it is okay. The death penalty is a righteous thing to do when done properly. There are times where it's okay to kill somebody by the authorities, like you said.
Christians were being killed for their faith. God still had vengeance on those. You know, when the time at his time.
Like Ananias and Sapphira?
No,
You talking about?
no, I'm talking
You said.
about like the Christians that, we're talking about like in Revelation, they were asking God,
Oh, yes. When will you avenge our blood? Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
At his time.
Right.
But he still, even on the innocent blood, he still imparted his vengeance on those that
Sure.
die. You know, even though you're not innocent, he will vindicate you.
Right.
So
That's-
it goes both ways, regardless.
That's why we have to have confidence in the judgment that's to come. Because in this lifetime, justice isn't always served out, is it? Some people die not getting the retribution they deserve. Some people die being punished undeservedly, as we talked about a minute ago, death penalty on the innocent. It's like, man, where's the justice on that? In the end, it will all be evened out. That's why this philosopher named Immanuel Kant, he was a German philosopher, not a Christian, but he made the point saying that if we ever hope to act like there's morality and justice in our world, he wasn't saying God exists, but he was saying we have to at least act like there is a God and that there is a judgment after our life is over. He said if we don't act like those things are true, then there's no point in having justice. There's no point in having morality. He understood that. He's right. It wouldn't make sense. What is justice? When you see justice go in this world not being meted out fully on people before they go. Right. Right. And as long as we have a law system that delays on punishment, and you know, our society will become more and more corrupt. I can promise you that. When people don't fear the law, why even have the law? What's the point of having a law if it's not enforced? The Constitution, I've told Kim this before at home, the Constitution is sitting in a glass case over in Washington. It's not going to bounce out to see a piece of paper coming down the road enforcing itself. It doesn't do that. It needs people to enforce it. It's a written law. It needs people to take care of it, though. And it's like if the people don't take care of it, you might as well throw the Constitution out. What's it going to do? It's just a historical document at that point. Anyway, okay, I've been beyond my time, but thank you all.